Bullied boy got a cheat skill in another world and became overpowered, then came back to the real world as the strongest. Yuya never felt like he could quite fit in this world, but he still longed to make a difference, even if it was small. His heart brimmed with kindness despite feeling like an outcast. One day, as he wandered down a narrow alley, he heard a girl's desperate cry for help. Curiosity piqued, Yuya approached to see if he could lend a hand. As he drew near, he saw the girl cornered by 3 menacing guys who refused to let her go. Summoning every ounce of courage he had, Yuya stepped forward and confronted the trio. They sneered at him, making fun of his weight, but he stood his ground. He called them out for their behavior, explaining that the girl was clearly distressed. But they twisted his words, taunted him, and then struck him with a vicious blow. Just in the nick of time, the police arrived and scared off the troublemakers, leaving Yuya crumpled on the ground. The girl rushed over to help, but Yuya, who had lost all of his sense of pride, simply got up and walked away. As he made his way home, Yuya recalled the wise lessons of his grandfather, who had always urged him to be kind to those in need. His grandfather had been his only ray of sunshine in an otherwise dark world, teaching him that in a world that had been unkind to him, he had found the courage to help someone in need. Even though it was just a small act of kindness, it showed that he was capable of making a difference. He knew that someday, just like his grandfather had taught him, he would find true happiness by being kind to others, and that courage would always light his path. Throughout his life, Yuya endured terrible bullying. At school, his colleagues would take his clothes off to bully him while calling him ugly. And if it wasn't enough, he was also bullied at home by his parents, who deemed him unworthy of being their son because he didn't have the same beautiful face as his siblings. It was only his grandfather's love and guidance that had kept him going. But one day, his sunlight turned into a dark, rainy day. His grandfather passed away, leaving him truly alone in this world. Knowing what would happen to Yuya if he went back to his parents' house, his grandfather left him with the house and his savings. His parents wanted to take it all, but since it was prepared by the grandfather, they simply disowned him, leaving their own son living alone and being forced to work part-time to survive. The following day, as Yuya attended his school graduation, he found himself facing his bullies once again. They had scrawled cruel insults all over his notebook. Desperate to escape, Yuya tried to flee, but the bullies chased him down and knocked him to the ground. He pleaded with them to stop, explaining that he needed to get to his part-time job. But the bullies only laughed, hurling more insults and beatings. A crowd of students gathered around, some taking photos and videos, while others jeered and laughed. After enduring an afternoon of torment, Yuya finally made it to work, only to be fired for arriving late. Feeling disheartened, Yuya returned home. He had so little money that all he could afford for dinner was instant noodles. He tried to stay strong and carry on with life, but when he looked at his face in the mirror, he realized it was impossible. He had hoped that graduating would change everything, but nothing seemed different. Overwhelmed by anger and despair, Yuya punched his reflection, shattering the mirror. Unable to control himself, he struck the wall, and to his surprise, the wall moved, revealing a secret door to a hidden room. Yuya wasn't sure if his grandfather knew about this room, but he could see souvenirs from his grandfather's travels around the world. Curiosity piqued, Yuya discovered another mysterious door within the room. When he opened it, he found what appeared to be a mountain hut. As he ventured inside, a status window popped up before his eyes. Confused, he assumed he had entered another world. He returned to the previous room to make sure, and while examining the door, another status window appeared, displaying the appraisal skill. Several other windows followed, including menu functions, money conversion, and transfer and entrance restrictions. Yuya was still confused but managed to grasp the basics. The last window showed his status, and to his disbelief, all of his stats were a flat 1 point. After reading more windows, he learned that he could assign points and use an item box to store items. But most importantly, he needed to find out where he was. To do so, he opened a window in the room and looked outside. Upon taking in the view, Yuya finally realized that he was in the middle of a lush forest in an entirely new world. As Yuya's eyes scanned the table, he noticed something unusual, a letter resting on its surface. He tried to read it but couldn't understand the language. In an instant, the system granted him a skill that enabled him to decipher the unfamiliar text. The letter, penned by the house's previous owner, revealed that they had passed away. As the next person to discover the house, Yuya would automatically inherit it, along with everything inside. The letter also explained that the house was protected by magic, preventing anyone that wasn't him from breaking in. With this newfound knowledge, Yuya began exploring the house, examining the various weapons and equipment stored within. He picked up a sword that, upon using his appraisal skill, turned out to be incredibly dangerous. Nevertheless, his curiosity gets the best of him and he steps outside to his yard and starts testing the sword. Due to the lack of stats, he clearly fails on his first attempt and ends up falling to the ground. However, a new window appeared, revealing that he had gained a point of proficiency in swords. He guesses that he got it that fast because he came from another world, and decides to see what happens by trying out several other weapons, earning 1 point of proficiency in each. But soon after mastering these skills, they vanished, merging into a single ability called True Martial Arts. As Yuya packed up his weapons into the item box, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching. He looks in its direction and sees a bloody ogre rushing toward him, ready to feast on his blood. Fortunately, the magic protecting the house formed a barrier that stopped the ogre from getting inside. Undeterred, the ogre continued its frenzied assault, trying to break through the barrier. Yuya checked the monster's stats, which revealed that it was level 300, a formidable foe. Unable to breach the barrier, the ogre ripped a tree from the ground and hurled it at Yuya. And once again, the barrier saves him. Yuya pondered whether he should attempt to throw his spear at the monster in a desperate bid to save himself. He positioned himself as best he could, mustering every inch of strength in his body to launch the spear at the fearsome creature. When he looked up to see the outcome, he was astounded by the sight before him. There's blood flying all over the place, and the monster has a huge hole in its chest. Yuya sank to his knees, staring at his hands in disbelief at what he had just accomplished. He looks up once again, and the monster disappears. At that moment, a status window appeared, showing that he had leveled up to level 100 and that all his stats had reached 1,000 points each. He approaches the location and finds out there are some equipment and items on the ground, dropped from the monster kill. He starts distributing his stat points, and since he's too tired for the first shock, he decides to head back and rest. As he approached the door, a cash-out window appeared. Out of nowhere, money he could use in the real world materialized and fell to the ground. That night, however, turned into Yuya's worst nightmare. His bones, muscles, and skin began to shift and contort all at the same time, causing him unbearable pain that only stopped when he passed out. He wakes up the next day, but there's something strange when he looks down. His belly was gone, replaced by a chiseled six-pack. As he touched his face and hair, he realized his clothes were too big and that something about him had changed. He tries to check himself in the mirror, but there's no mirror anymore and ends up not caring about it. Since his clothes don't fit him, he instead donned the clothes and equipment from the house in the other world and ventured outside. He discovered the previous owner had been growing vegetables, so he decided to maintain the garden in their honor. Suddenly, another level 200 monster starts to clash against the barrier. But this time, Yuya is calmer than last time. He brings his spear out and easily defeats the monster. He checks the monster drops. There are some normal items, but he got really lucky this time. He got a rare drop accessory, and he equips the new necklace right away. His level increased to 150. And all his stats reached at least 2,000 points each. He heads back and decides to use the new cash-out money to buy a new uniform for his upcoming high school entrance. But until that day, Yuya cared for the house in the new world, using his farmed vegetables for meals that end up improving his stats. He starts to happily enjoy his new days, thinking about how depressed he was to join high school after being bullied for all those years. But now, he managed to overcome it and got more curious about this new world. There he used to train and level up his martial arts proficiency. He was eating some strange but tasty drops from the previous monsters. He was finally enjoying a happy life. But of course, monsters won't leave him alone, just like this elite goblin. He stores all the drops in his box and is ready for his new school. The next day, Yuya finally gets to join his new high school without realizing that people are all looking at him talking about how good-looking he is. In his new classroom, his former bullies approached him. He starts trembling in fear, and they ask him who is he. He reveals that he's the ugly kid who they used to bully, but everyone reacts shocked. Nobody can believe the transformation. After class, Yuya rushed to the bathroom to finally see his reflection. When he looked in the mirror, he screamed in disbelief at the handsome face staring back at